When we first started the show, I really thought we were doing a show about building cars and motorcycles for people. It evolved into a show about people and their story. It really brought challenges in the early days.
Danny Koker finally names the 5 worst employees on Counting Cars. He built one of the most beloved garages on television, turned a small Las Vegas custom shop into a household name, and made millions of viewers fall in love with roaring engines and wild paint jobs. But behind every episode of Counting Cars, there is a side of the business the cameras never fully showed. A side full of betrayal, stolen money, vanished crew members, and quiet exits that fans spent years trying to explain. Today we're breaking down the 5 people who left Counts Customs under the messiest circumstances, what actually happened to each of them, and why Danny Koker's shop learned some very hard lessons about who to trust. Stick around, because story number 1 involves a scheme so bold it landed a former crew member in real legal trouble. Before we get into the exits, it helps to understand how Danny Koker built the world these stories happened in. Danny was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but grew up mostly in the Detroit area, a city practically built on the auto industry. Muscle cars, car shows, and grease-stained garages weren't a hobby where he grew up. They were the wallpaper of everyday life. His father, a working musician who toured with gospel groups, filled the house with music, but it was cars that captured young Danny's attention. While other kids chased video games, Danny spent his afternoons under the hood of whatever old vehicle he could get his hands on, learning to bring dead engines back to life one bolt at a time. By the early 1990s, Danny had relocated to Las Vegas, chasing a mix of entertainment and mechanical passion that doesn't usually go together. He first made a name for himself locally as a late-night television horror host, dressed up in a theatrical, rocker vampire persona, introducing B-movies to insomniac viewers. It was campy and over the top, but it built him a small following. All the while, his real focus never left cars. He opened a shop originally meant just to maintain his own personal collection, and it slowly turned into something bigger as word got around Vegas about the quality of his builds. Bold paint, aggressive stances, and a total disregard for whatever was trendy at the time. The turning point came through an unlikely connection. Because his shop sat close to the famous pawn shop featured on Pawn Stars, producers started calling him in whenever the show needed an expert opinion on a car or motorcycle. Audiences liked him instantly, and that led to the launch of Counting Cars on the History Channel in 2012. The premise was simple. Follow Danny and his crew as they restored, modified, and occasionally argued their way through custom builds. It worked because it felt real. There was no manufactured plot armor, just a shop full of strong personalities trying to finish cars on deadline, while a camera crew hovered nearby. What most fans didn't realize is that the pressure behind that authenticity was enormous. A single episode compresses weeks, sometimes months, of actual labor into about 20 minutes of screen time. Parts get backordered. Paint doesn't cure the way you want it to. Engines need to be pulled apart and reassembled more than once. Danny has never been shy about demanding perfection, which means every rush job, every corner someone tried to cut, got sent right back to be redone. That kind of standard is great for the final product, but it's brutal on a crew working under a television clock. Then there was the fame itself, which changed the shop in ways nobody fully expected. What used to be a tight-knit garage suddenly became a tourist destination. Fans lined up outside, hoping for photos. Strangers wandered in mid-shift wanting autographs. For some of the crew, the attention was flattering. For others, it became a distraction that fed egos and created friction that hadn't existed before the camera showed up. Add in new contracts, new legal protections for the brand, and the growing complexity of running multiple businesses under the Counts name, and it's not hard to see why cracks started to form in the crew Danny had built. Out of all those cracks, 5 departures stand out as the messiest, most talked about, and most consequential in the show's history. The first name on this list isn't someone casual viewers would even recognize, because he almost never appeared on camera. Joseph Frontiero wasn't a mechanic, a painter, or a builder. He worked behind a desk, handling the books, payroll, and day-to-day finances for Counts Customs. He was placed with the shop through a staffing agency back in 2013, and for a while, Everything about the arrangement looked completely normal. He was trusted with sensitive financial access most crew members never touched, which made what came next all the more damaging. According to a lawsuit Kustoms later filed, irregularities started showing up in the company's accounting and in some client project records. When ownership dug into what was going on, they found that Frontiera had allegedly diverted more than $75,000 of company money for personal use. Court filings claim the funds went toward things like a down payment on a Range Rover and personal airline travel, expenses that had nothing to do with running a custom car shop. To make matters worse, the lawsuit alleged he had unauthorized signature stamps made in the names of the shop's owners, allowing him to approve and sign checks without anyone catching it in real time. The company also claimed his mismanagement led to unpaid taxes, resulting in an IRS penalty north of $18,000. When the situation came to light, Kustoms didn't just fire him quietly and move on. They filed suit against Frontiera directly, and they also went after the staffing agency that had placed him, arguing the agency failed to properly vet his background before putting him in a position with access to company funds. That countersuit became its own legal tangle, with the staffing agency pushing back on the allegations. What made the story even more shocking to longtime viewers is that Frontiera had simply vanished from episodes with no explanation on screen. No goodbye scene, no mention of why he was gone. He was just absent, and fans were left to speculate for months before the lawsuit made headlines and connected the dots. Reports later indicated the case escalated into criminal territory as well, tied to accusations of theft and failure to pay the company's taxes properly. Since then, Frontiera has kept an extremely low profile, with no public statements, no social media presence tied to the controversy, and no further television appearances. For a man who once controlled the shop's entire financial backbone, his disappearance from public life has been almost total. The lesson for Danny and his team was blunt and expensive. Even the people who never touch a wrench can do more damage than anyone holding one. If Frontiera's story was about money disappearing quietly behind a desk, the next name on the list was anything but quiet. Scott Jones was one of the very first faces viewers met when Counting Cars premiered, serving as shop manager and handling a chunk of the budgeting responsibilities alongside Danny. Where Danny was the creative engine of the shop, always chasing the next ambitious build, Scott was the guy trying to keep spending under control. That dynamic made for some of the most entertaining friction in the show's early seasons. Scott would push back on pricey ideas, question line items, and generally play the role of fiscal reality check to Danny's big imagination. Fans either loved the back and forth as comic relief or saw it as a genuine divide in how the two men approached the business. Then, after the second season, Scott was simply gone. There was no on-screen send-off, no explanation woven into an episode, nothing. Naturally, that kind of silent exit fueled rumors. Some viewers assumed he'd been pushed out over financial disagreements. Others guessed there was a deeper falling out between him and Danny that never made it to air. None of those theories were ever confirmed by the show itself, and the truth, as it later came out, was far less dramatic than fans expected. Scott had relocated to Tennessee for personal and family reasons, choosing to prioritize being closer to loved ones over staying in front of the cameras in Las Vegas. It's a reminder that not every quiet exit hides a scandal. Sometimes people just choose a different life. Since leaving the show, Scott hasn't stepped away from the automotive world at all. He runs his own shop in Tennessee and has continued building a name for himself in the custom and restoration scene, even popping up on other car-focused television projects. His run on Counting Cars might have ended without fanfare, but his career in the industry never slowed down. Still, for a show that thrives on drama, an unexplained disappearance has left a permanent question mark for fans who never got the full story until years later. The third departure hit fans differently because this crew member wasn't just liked. He was genuinely adored. Rolly Sabo spent multiple seasons as the shop's lead detailer, the person responsible for making sure every finished build left the garage looking flawless. But what made Rolly a fan favorite wasn't just his technical skill with a polish rag. It was his personality. With a thick accent and easy laugh, and a habit of turning even the most tedious detailing work into a source of comic relief. He became one of the most quoted, most clipped, most talked about personalities the show ever had. Underneath the jokes, though, was a genuine perfectionist who treated every car, no matter how ordinary, like it deserved showroom-level attention. By the show's midpoint, Rowley had become appointment viewing for a lot of fans, someone whose scenes people specifically looked forward to, which made it all the more jarring when reports surfaced that thousands of dollars worth of professional detailing equipment had gone missing from the shop, and shortly afterward, Rowley disappeared from the cast without any on-screen explanation. There was no farewell episode, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just silence, followed by rumors connecting the missing gear to his sudden absence. Kustoms never issued a public statement laying out exactly what occurred, which left the timing of the equipment disappearing and his exit to speak for themselves in the eyes of many fans. It's important to be clear that the connection between the missing tools and his departure was never officially confirmed by the shop. It remained speculation fueled largely by suspicious timing rather than a documented finding. Whatever the full story actually was, Rowley didn't vanish from the industry. He stayed in Las Vegas and opened his own detailing business, building a loyal local following, doing exactly the kind of meticulous work that made him a standout on the show in the first place. For fans who grew up watching him crack jokes while making paint shine like glass, it's at least a little comforting to know his skills didn't go anywhere, even if his time with Danny's crew ended under a cloud of unanswered questions. Not every exit on this list involves suspicion or scandal, though. The fourth name belongs to someone whose departure looked almost nothing like the others. Shannon Ikaw spent years as the shop's lead motorcycle builder, and if you ask longtime fans, he was one of the most quietly talented people who ever worked there. He wasn't the loudest personality in the room. He didn't get into shouting matches on camera or chase the spotlight. What he did was build motorcycles with a level of craftsmanship that stood out even among a shop full of skilled builders. Clean welds, bold but tasteful designs, and bikes that clearly carried his personal fingerprint from frame to finish. As the seasons went on, though, Shannon's screen time started shrinking. Episodes that used to feature him prominently began giving him only a few seconds here and there, and eventually he mostly faded from view. There was no blow-up, no dramatic confrontation captured on film, nothing that gave viewers a clean narrative to latch onto. Based on how the show evolved and what longtime viewers have pieced together, the shift seems to have come down to a change in direction rather than any personal conflict. As Counting Cars leaned harder into manufactured tension and storyline drama to keep ratings up, it reportedly clashed with Shannon's preference for letting the work speak for itself rather than performing for the camera. Rather than making noise about it, he simply stepped back, the same understated way he'd always operated in the shop. Shannon never left the custom motorcycle world, either. He stayed active in the Las Vegas scene, continuing to design and build bikes that carry the same quiet precision fans came to associate with his name on the show. Out of everyone on this list, his story stands out as the one without any villain. No lawsuit, no missing equipment, no rumor mill. Just a craftsman who wanted the work to matter more than the show, and who left with his reputation completely intact. The final name on this list is someone who is almost impossible to miss on screen, even in a shop full of big characters. Mike Henry, known to fans as Horny Mike thanks to his signature horned helmet and larger-than-life presence, served as the shop's lead airbrush artist. While other crew members focused on mechanics and bodywork, Mike was the one turning finished builds into genuine art. Flame jobs, elaborate murals, and detailed custom graphics that gave many of the shop's most memorable vehicles their final identity. He came into the shop with a background in custom paint and design work, and Danny quickly gave him room to put his own creative stamp on projects, which paid off in some genuinely striking builds. But that creative freedom eventually ran into the practical realities of running a business under a television deadline. Mike had bold, sometimes unconventional ideas, and as the shop's owner, Danny had to balance those ideas against what fit the brand and what could realistically be finished in time for filming. Airbrush work in particular doesn't move fast. Layering color, blending shading, and getting every detail right takes hours that a packed production schedule doesn't always allow for. Over time, that tension between artistic ambition and network deadlines seems to have worn on him, and his screen presence started shrinking in later seasons. He wasn't fired, and there was no on-camera falling out. He simply began shifting his focus toward projects on his own terms rather than the ones dictated by a filming schedule. Today, Mike runs his own custom airbrush and design business, still creating the kind of bold, detailed artwork that made him a fan favorite, just without a camera crew standing over his shoulder. He hasn't completely cut ties with Count's Kustoms either, occasionally showing up for special projects when the timing works out. His story is less about betrayal and more about an artist deciding that creative control mattered more to him than screen time, which is a trait a lot of viewers can respect, even if it meant losing one of the show's most colorful personalities. Looking back at all 5 of these stories together, what's striking is how differently each one played out. One person allegedly built an elaborate financial scheme that ended in a lawsuit and a very public fallout. Another left for something as simple and human as wanting to be closer to family. A fan favorite's exit got tangled up in missing equipment and rumors that were never fully confirmed. A quiet craftsman walked away on his own terms rather than compromise his standards. And a talented artist chose his own creative freedom over the demands of a shooting schedule. Not every departure from Counting Cars was a scandal, even though it might feel that way when a beloved face just disappears from the screen without explanation. What these stories really show is how much pressure builds up behind a successful reality show once real money, real fame, and real egos get mixed together in a small shop that used to just be about cars. Danny Koker built something that fans genuinely love, but keeping that machine running smoothly meant learning some hard lessons about who to trust with the books, who could handle the spotlight without letting it change them, and who simply wasn't going to stick around once the work stopped being just about the work. Some of these 5 walked away with their names dragged through legal trouble. Others walked away with their reputations completely untouched, just choosing a quieter life over another season of television. Either way, each of them left a mark on the shop, and on the show, that fans still talk about years later. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the crew members who shaped Counting Cars behind the scenes, let us know in the comments which of these 5 stories surprised you the most. And if you want more behind-the-scenes breakdowns like this one, make sure you're subscribed because there are plenty more stories from your favorite shows that never made it to the screen.